It happened on a rainy afternoon. My daughter, Sophia, stood at the threshold of her house, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. Her voice cracked like thunder. "You're dead to me. Don't ever come to my house again." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The rain drummed harder on my umbrella, a hollow percussion that made her words echo inside my skull. I was holding the wedding photo frame I had given her years ago, our smiles frozen in glass. My fingers tightened around it until the edges bit into my palm. The door slammed. The sound reverberated through my chest like a gavel pronouncing a verdict. My knees trembled. I had to clutch the iron railing to keep myself upright. The air smelled of wet concrete and lavender perfume. The scent she always wore, now forever soured in my memory. I wanted to knock again, to ask, "Why?" Sash. But my throat closed up. All I could hear was the muffled laughter of her children inside, my grandchildren, the ones I used to tuck into bed with stories. Their laughter felt like knives, reminding me that I was no longer welcome in their world. The rain soaked through my coat. My glasses fogged, blurring the photo in my hands. Sophia's younger self, in that white gown, was smiling at me from behind the glass. How cruel that ink and paper would remember our bond more faithfully than flesh and blood. I staggered back down the steps, each one heavier than the last. My heart pounded, not from the walk, but from the weight of being erased. The umbrella slipped from my grip, clattering against the pavement. I didn't bother to pick it up. The sky was already weeping for me. I whispered, though no one could hear. "Dead to you? Then who am I to myself?" Cars rushed past the street, their headlights cutting through the gray mist. No one stopped for the old woman clutching a photo frame as if it were life support. I stood there long enough for the chill to creep into my bones. The truth struck harder than the rain. My daughter, the girl who once pressed my hand in hers and called me her hero, had just declared me a ghost. And I couldn't help asking myself, if the very child who once looked up to you as her savior now swears you are dead to her, what are you supposed to do next? I am Margaret Lewis, 67 years old, once a literature teacher, now a woman learning how to breathe again. When I walked away from Sophia's door that rainy afternoon, clutching the wedding photo frame like a shield, the past began replaying in my mind, every sacrifice, every late night, every dollar I had scraped together for her future. I was 23 when I first stood at the front of a classroom, chalk in hand, my heart hammering like a drum. Over the next 40 years, I taught literature to thousands of students. I guided them through Shakespeare's tragedies, Dickinson's verses, and the tangled forests of Faulkner. My voice grew hoarse, my hands cracked from chalk dust, but my heart never wavered. The pay, however, was modest, barely enough to cover bills and food. Month after month, I learned to live on less, tucking away whatever scraps I could into a savings account. I denied myself new coats, dinners out, vacations. Each time I hesitated, I whispered, "It's for Sophia. One day she will need this." And she did. When she turned 18, she dreamed of studying in London, chasing a master's degree in international business. I remember the day she showed me the acceptance letter. "Mom, I got in. London. Can you believe it?" she cried, waving the letter above her head like a victory flag. My chest filled with pride, but also with the heavy weight of responsibility. Tuition alone was staggering, nearly $180,000 over 5 years, not counting rent, food, or books. But I smiled and said, "Of course, darling. If London is where your wings can spread, then we'll find a way." The truth? There was no we. It was just me. I took on extra tutoring sessions, edited student essays for a few extra dollars, even sold a pearl necklace my mother had given me. I stretched every paycheck until it screamed. I stopped fixing the leaky roof, patching it instead with buckets that caught the rain. For 5 years, while Sophia studied abroad, I lived on stale bread and instant soup. My shoes had holes, but her rent in London was always paid on time. My hands stiffened with arthritis, but her textbooks always arrived fresh from the bookstore. Sometimes, when the house felt unbearably empty, I would sit in the living room, holding the sweating photo frame she had given me years earlier. In the picture, she leaned against me in her white gown, eyes sparkling, whispering, "Mom, my best friend." That frame became my anchor, proof that my sacrifices meant something. I told myself, this is why I teach. This is why I save. One day, she'll remember. And yet, there were small signs I ignored. During her years in London, her calls became less frequent. "Mom, I'm busy with exams." "Mom, I'm out with friends." "Mom, can we talk later?" I convinced myself it was normal. Young people had lives, didn't they? Still, each time the phone clicked dead, I stared at the silent receiver, wondering if love could fade like an echo. By the time she returned from London, polished and ambitious, the distance between us was wider than the Atlantic Ocean. She carried herself with a new confidence, which should have made me proud. But when she hugged me, her arms felt lighter, as if she was embracing a memory rather than a mother. Maybe, I thought, I smothered her. Maybe I loved her too much. And in loving her, I turned myself invisible. The house we shared for decades no longer felt like a home to her. She called it old-fashioned, complained about the squeaky stairs, the chipped paint. She wanted sleek apartments and shining glass towers, not the wooden walls that had sheltered her through childhood storms. One evening, she stood in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. "Mom, you should think about selling this place. It's too much for you." I laughed softly. "Too much? This house raised you, Sophia." She didn't even look up. "Exactly. It's stuck in the past. You need something smaller. Modern." Her words stung more than she realized. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was 40 years of life. Of saving pennies, cooking meals, grading essays at midnight, tucking her into bed after nightmares. It was the smell of chalk, of baked bread, of lavender detergent. It was me. Still, I swallowed the pain. Because that's what mothers do. But now, she had shouted me out of her life entirely. "You're dead to me." The words gnawed at my chest like termites. How could she erase 4 decades with a single sentence? I sat in my living room that night. The wedding frame balanced on my lap. The photo blurred as tears gathered in my eyes. My fingers traced the glass, trying to feel the warmth of that long-lost moment when she had called me my best friend. I whispered into the silence. "Did I love you wrong, Sophia? Did I mistake sacrifice for love? Did I build a cage instead of wings?" The house groaned with the weight of years, the clock ticking like a metronome of regret. I realized then that my life had been a ledger of giving. 40 years teaching, 40 years saving, 5 years paying for a dream that was never mine. Every dollar, every drop of sweat, every wrinkle etched into my skin, all invested in her. And now, she had written me off like an outdated book, no longer worth reading. I wanted to scream, but my voice cracked. I wanted to tear the photo from its frame, but my hand refused. Because somewhere inside, despite everything, I still clung to hope. Hope that the girl who once called me her hero would remember. But another voice inside whispered, maybe she remembers too well. Maybe she resents the debt of love she never asked for. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. The rain still tapped on the window outside, a lullaby I had heard for decades. But tonight it sounded different, like an accusation. And I admitted to myself, in a whisper, no one else would ever hear. Perhaps I loved her in a way that made her feel trapped. Perhaps I was the weight she longed to escape. After Sophia's words cut me out of her life, I retreated to the only place that still felt safe, my old reading room. The shelves bowed under the weight of decades of books, their spines worn from years of my chalk-stained fingers turning pages. Dust hung in the air like ghosts, drifting through a single shaft of lamplight. I sank into the armchair, its fabric threadbare but familiar, and reached for the first book my hand touched. Pride and Prejudice. Dog sad. My thumb traced the faded cover. I remembered reading it aloud to Sophia when she was 12, her head resting on my lap. She had giggled when Darcy finally confessed his love. Back then, she thought love was the answer to everything. Now, love felt like a trap I had built with my own hands. I opened the book, but the words swam before me. My chest tightened, and for the first time in years, I admitted the thought I had been pushing away. If I keep giving, I will vanish completely. If I stop, I might lose her. But at least I will still have myself. The house creaked around me, every sound magnified by silence. My eyes landed on the envelope on the desk, the mortgage application Sophia had insisted I sign. She wanted to use this house, my last piece of security, as collateral for her and her husband's business venture. I picked it up, the paper crackling between my fingers. Her neat handwriting filled the blanks where my signature was supposed to go. I imagined her waiting, confident that I would, as always, give in. My hands trembled, not with weakness this time, but with something fiercer, resolve. I whispered aloud, the sound startling even myself. No, not this time. The lamp flickered, and the rain outside lashed harder against the window. It was as though the world demanded I decide, here and now. I closed my eyes, imagining two paths. On one, I signed. I gave them the house. Eventually, I would be left with nothing but an empty bank account and a broken spirit. On the other, I refused. The price would be high. Sophia's fury, her distance, perhaps even her hatred. But at least I would stand on my own feet, not as a shadow, but as a woman who once mattered. I pressed the envelope flat on the desk, then slowly tore it down the middle. The rip of paper sliced through the silence like thunder. My heart pounded, but not from fear. This time it was from relief. The decision was final. I would not allow Sophia to use my home for her loans. I leaned back in the chair, tears slipping down my cheeks. They were not tears of weakness, but of release. For years, my life had revolved around what Sophia wanted, what Sophia demanded. Now, for the first time, I had chosen myself. Still, guilt coiled in my stomach. A voice whispered, "What if she never forgives you? What if she disappears forever?" I pressed my palm flat against my chest, feeling the thud of my heartbeat. Another voice answered, "Better to lose her love than to lose your own soul." The wedding photo frame glimmered on the shelf across the room. I walked to it, lifted it into my hands. Her younger self smiled at me through the glass, eyes filled with trust. "I loved you too much," I murmured. "But loving you shouldn't mean erasing me." I set the frame back down. But this time it didn't feel like an anchor. It felt like a reminder of who I had been and who I could still become. At that moment, the phone rang. My pulse jumped. I picked it up and heard Sophia's voice, sharp and impatient. "Mom, did you sign the papers?" I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. "No, Sophia, I didn't. And I won't." Silence. Then her voice rose like a whip. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this?" My hands trembled, but my voice stayed firm. "The only mistake I made was forgetting I have a right to my own life." She hung up, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I placed the receiver back gently, my hands finally still. In that quiet room, surrounded by the books that had shaped me, I realized something essential. My story was not over. My daughter could try to erase me, but I still held the pen. I walked to my desk, opened a blank journal, and wrote in large, uneven letters, "I am not a shadow following someone else's signature. I am the keeper of my own pen." And for the first time in years, the words felt like freedom. The knock came at twilight, sharp and insistent, rattling the glass panes of my front door. I already knew who it was before I rose from the armchair. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stand tall as I opened the door. There they were, Sophia, her husband Mark, and a man in a dark suit clutching a leather briefcase. The sight of the briefcase alone made my stomach knot. Sophia's eyes blazed with impatience. Mark crossed his arms, lips pressed into a thin line. The man in the suit introduced himself briskly. Mrs. Lewis, I'm attorney David Price. I represent your daughter and son-in-law. The title, represent, hit me like a slap. My daughter had actually brought a lawyer against me. Sophia pushed forward, holding out a stack of documents. Just sign, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at her, my throat tightening. No, my roof is not your bargaining chip. Mark stepped closer, his cologne strong and suffocating. It's a smart business move. The house is just sitting here, wasting potential. This way, you help us, and we make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. As if I were a pet to be settled into a corner. I took a step back, clutching the edge of the door. I am comfortable, Mark. More comfortable without debt tied around my neck. Sophia's voice cracked like ice. Mom, stop being stubborn. If you really cared about me, you'd sign. I felt my nails dig into my palms. If you erase me to get a house, then I was never in your heart. For a moment, silence fell. Even the lawyer glanced uneasily between us. The only sound was the wind moaning through the trees outside. Mark broke it with a low growl. We're offering you security. Don't be foolish. Refuse, and you'll regret it. The lawyer cleared his throat, placing the papers on the hall table. Mrs. Lewis, this agreement simply transfers limited control of the property for financial leverage. Perfectly legal. All it needs is your signature. He tapped the page with a polished pen. The sound echoed like a hammer striking nails into my coffin. I looked at the pen, then at my daughter's face. Her features were hard, unrecognizable from the girl who once clung to my skirt on her first day of school. You would bring a stranger into my house to pressure me, I whispered. Sophia's lips trembled but held firm. You're forcing my hand, Mom. If you won't help us, then you're choosing to break this family. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My voice sharpened instead. Families are not built on signatures and threats. If this is what you call family, then perhaps it has already been broken. Mark slammed his fist against the table, the photo frame rattling where it sat on the mantel. My breath caught. The frame, the wedding picture of Sophia in her gown, tilted dangerously. I rushed forward, grabbing it before it could fall. I pressed it to my chest, as if the glass and paper could shield me from their betrayal. Sophia's voice rose, cracking under strain. Fine. If you don't sign, don't expect us to come back. You'll lose me. You'll lose your grandchildren, forever. The words sliced deeper than any knife. For a heartbeat, I faltered. My grandchildren's laughter, their hugs, their tiny hands in mine. They flashed before me like lightning. But then, I felt the frame in my arms, its edges firm against my ribs, reminding me of all the years I had already given. My voice came out steady, colder than I thought possible. Better to lose you than lose myself. Sophia recoiled as if I had struck her. Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. The lawyer, sensing the battle was over, stuffed his papers back into his case. As they turned away, Sophia's eyes met mine one last time. I searched for even a flicker of the girl I had raised, the girl who once whispered, "Mom, my best friend." But her gaze was hard, unyielding. I stepped back, clutching the photo frame like a lifeline. My hand found the doorknob. With one final look, I closed the door. The lock clicked, the sound echoing like a verdict. Final, irrevocable. On the other side, I heard Sophia's muffled voice, shrill with anger. You'll regret this, Mom. You'll regret it. Their footsteps faded down the porch. The night swallowed their voices. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. But even through the blur, I felt something shift inside me. Pain, yes, but also a strange, trembling relief. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. I wiped my face, whispering into the empty house. If you erase me to get a house, then I was never in your heart. Then I clutched the wedding frame tighter, turned away from the door, and walked deeper into the quiet, locking the world outside. The first letter arrived 3 days after I locked the door. A white envelope with an unfamiliar return address, the kind of clinical stationery that makes your stomach sink before you even break the seal. Inside, a concerned family petition suggesting that I might be no longer competent to manage my own affairs. I sat at the kitchen table with the paper trembling in my hands. The language was careful, lawyerly, full of pity sharpened into a blade. Increasing forgetfulness, unsafe behaviors, financial confusion. None of it was true. All of it was devastating. I read it again, my cheeks burning. Unstable. Confused. At risk. D. The words crawled under my skin like ants. Somewhere across town, Sophia and Mark had turned from pressure to strategy. If I wouldn't sign, they would make the world believe I couldn't. I picked up the phone and called my neighbor, Mrs. Balling. Parker. Come over? I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I meant. She was at my door in minutes. White hair in a neat bun, cardigan the color of peppermint. She read the letter, eyes narrowing. Well, she said, and her mouth tightened in a way that made me love her a little. That's a nasty piece of fiction. I managed a brittle laugh. They'll bring witnesses. It says so here. They can bring a choir, she said, tapping the paper, and it'll still be out of tune. That afternoon, I learned 2 things. 1. Fear is loud. 2. Resolve is quieter, but heavier, like a stone you can hold. The next rumor met me at the grocery store. Mr. Patel at the pharmacy counter tilted his head with unusual concern. Mrs. Lewis, everything all right? Your daughter called, asking about a refill you never picked up. Insisted you're missing doses. I blinked. I don't have any missed refills. He checked the screen, frowning. You're right. You picked everything up on time. Twice this month. I walked home with milk and a knot in my throat. The case they were building wasn't just on paper. It was in whispers, in calls, in small cuts that nick a reputation until it bleeds out. 2 days later, the man in the dark suit, David Price, returned. This time with a clipboard and a female colleague who introduced herself as a wellness advocate. They stood on my porch, smiling the way people smile at a skittish animal. We're simply checking in. Mrs. Lewis, she cooed. We hear you've been having difficulties. I left them on the step with the door between us and said, my only difficulty is people who think a signature is more important than a soul. Then I closed the door and slid the deadbolt. Palms sweaty but steady. That was the moment I decided to find my lawyer. Not to fight a war, but to refuse an erasure. His office was on the 3rd floor of a sandstone building that looked like a book left open. The plaque read, M.A. Martin Cole, ESQ. Elder Advocacy and Guardianship Defense. Inside, the reception desk was crowded with file stacks and a bowl of lemon drops. The man himself came out to greet me, 55 if a day, square-shouldered, tie slightly askew, as if he'd been in motion for years and only stopped to shake my hand. Mrs. Lewis, he said, warm but economical. I'm Martin. I liked him immediately for not calling me Margaret like we were cousins, and not calling me ma'am like I was fragile. We sat in his office, books lining the walls, a potted fern determinedly alive on the sill. I handed him the petition. He read in quick, efficient swallows, eyebrows climbing. Classic, he said softly. Allegations first, evidence later. They'll try to stack soft testimony. A neighbor who noticed confusion. A pharmacist who heard concerns, A friend who feared for your safety. If they can frame this as protective, they look like heroes even when they're pickpockets. Can they win? I asked, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. They can if we let them write the story, he said. So we don't. We write ours. He reached for a yellow legal pad. Tell me everything that proves your ordinary competence. Daily routines. Bills paid. Commitments kept. The more boring, the better. Juries love boring. I smiled despite myself. I taught high school literature for 40 years. Boring is my mother tongue. He grinned. Then we'll be fine. We built a list. Automatic utilities drafted and matched to my ledger. Bank statements I balanced by hand every Sunday. The reading group I led on Tuesdays at the public library. The volunteer front desk shift at the community food bank every other Friday. My painting class on Thursdays at 2, where I was, if I say so myself, the terror of crooked horizons. Names, Martin said. We'll need witnesses who see you, regularly, in unremarkable ways. Mrs. Parker, I said. She's my neighbor. Brutally honest. Perfect. Brutal honesty plays well. He jotted more. We'll also schedule a full cognitive evaluation by a geriatric specialist. Not because you need to prove yourself to me, but because a clean, professional assessment cuts through the fog they'll blow. Thank you, I said. 2 words, inadequate, and all I had. He slid a card across the desk. Between now and then, I want you to do something radical. I braced for instructions about exercise or brain teasers. Live your life, he said. Show up. Let them say you are a ghost while you move like a person. I left the office lighter than I arrived. On Thursday, I went to painting class. The studio smelled of linseed oil and coffee, the windows tall and dreamy. Nora from the front desk waved me in. Eleanor. Oh, I'm sorry, Margaret. You're early. Old habit, I said. Teachers and their clocks. We set up our easels. The assignment was a still life. 3 pears, a blue bottle, a white bowl. Mine looked, at first, like 3 suspicious potatoes glowering at a drowned moon. But I kept at it, adjusting the shadows until the pears grew weight, and the bottle caught light like a secret. At break, Nora handed me a small bouquet of lavender, tied with twine. A leftover from the morning class. Someone should enjoy it. I lifted the stems to my face and inhaled. The scent reached straight back through years. The lotion I used when Sophia was a baby, the sachets in my dresser, the perfume she wore the day she told me I was dead to her. Something broke and rebuilt inside me at once. I heard a sound, sharp, unfamiliar, and realized it was my own laughter, quick and astonished. Listen to you, Nora said, smiling. It's been a while, I admitted. I tucked the lavender into my tote and, for the first time in months, didn't check my phone. Meanwhile, the rumors multiplied. The witness they'd found from down the street, Mr. Hargreaves, who couldn't tell rosemary from poison ivy, told anyone who'd listen that he'd seen me leave my car running for an hour in the driveway. It had been 10 minutes, and I'd been scraping frost off the windshield. He'd waved as he walked by, complimented my hat. At the library, Judith from my reading group said, "Someone from Child and Family Services called to ask whether you've ever gotten lost during discussions." I told them the only person who gets lost in discussion is Leonard, and he's 38 and allergic to endings. We laughed, but I felt the cold edge of it. They were building a scaffold of stories and inviting the world to hammer in nails. So I gathered my own stories. With Mrs. Parker's help, I printed the last year of bank statements and highlighted every on-time payment. At the pharmacy, Mr. Fuel Patel stamped a record of every fill and pickup with exact timestamps. The food bank wrote a letter noting my volunteer schedule, punctual attendance, and the number of intake forms I'd logged, my tidy handwriting, my consistent math. Martin looped it all into a binder spine labeled in neat block letters. 2. Levelwiz. Capacity. He sat with me at his conference table and rehearsed questions. If they ask you what day it is, don't snap. He smiled. I know you'll want to. I'll be polite, I said. I'll even be charming. I'm counting on it. He gestured to the binder. And this is our friend. You don't need to memorize it. You just need to know it exists. The last page was a letter from Dr. Alvarez, the geriatrician. We'd spent an hour together in a sunlit exam room playing the world's least amusing party games, counting backward by sevens, drawing intersecting pentagons, recalling a list of nouns that included apple, chair, and violet. She'd asked me to name animals that begin with the letter S. I gave her 7 before she lifted her pen. Sparrow, salmon, stallion, sheepdog, swallow, seal, shrew. When she requested a proverb, I offered, no one can write your story but you. I don't think that's a proverb, she said, smiling. It is now, I said. Her report was precise, clinical, and more beautiful to me than any poem. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Oriented to person, place, time. Judgment intact. I pressed my palm to the paragraph, as if I could warm it into permanence. The night before our first hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked the dim hallway, the house creaking like an old ship. In the living room, the SICU-wedding photo frame waited on the mantel. I took it down, using the hem of my pajama sleeve to wipe a ghost of dust from the glass. Where did we lose each other? I asked the young woman inside the frame, the bride with laughter at the edge of her mouth. The glass had no answers. My reflection hovered there alongside hers, a woman with lined eyes and steady hands. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You don't have to do this. Sign tomorrow, and it goes away. Mick. I stared at the M until the letters blurred. Mark, I thought. Of course. Of course. I typed and erased a dozen replies. In the end, I put the phone face down and stood there in the quiet, until my breath matched the clock. I'd mistaken so many kinds of noise for love. Maybe love was the part that could survive the quiet. At 8 a.m., Mrs. Parker arrived in a navy skirt suit that made her look like she ran the world. You look unstoppable, I said. Stop is for stop signs, she said. We're pedestrians. We go. In the courtroom lobby, Martin met us with coffee and a calm that made the floor feel less like ice. He flicked open the binder, checked a tab, closed it again. Remember, he said, they're not villains in their own minds. Don't take their bait. We show the truth. That's all. We sat on a wooden bench while the petitioners, my daughter and her husband, huddled with Attorney Price. Sophia didn't look at me. I studied the side of her face, searching for the child I knew, for anything I could hold. She lifted her hand to tuck hair behind her ear, and I recognized the gesture. It made something inside me ache and steady at once. When they called our case, we filed in. The judge wore neutrality, like a second skin. I held on to my lavender sprig, tucked small in my purse, the scent rising each time I breathed. Price opened with concern and sorrow, the kind that photographs well. He introduced Mr. Hargreaves, who squinted at me as if I were a rumor he'd half believed. He recounted my alleged confusions, each one a story with the truth shaved thin. Martin called our witnesses one by one. Mr. Patel with his printouts, Judith with her reading group attendance sheet and a sidebar about Leonard's theatrical tangents, Nora with the studio sign-in logs. Margaret's always early, and she bullies her sky into shape, she said, grinning at the judge, who didn't quite smile but almost did. Finally, Mrs. Parker took the stand. She sat straight, hands folded, joyful menace in her voice. Mrs. Parker, Martin said, how often do you see Mrs. Lewis? Daily, she said. Sometimes twice if I burn the muffins. And have you noticed confusion or unsafe behavior? Only when I talk too long about my cats, she said. Then, more soberly, Mrs. Lewis cooks, drives, cleans, schedules her own appointments. and corrects my crossword. She argues about commas with a zeal I find exhausting. She's as competent as I am, and I would know I've been both competent and foolish, often in the same hour. Price tried to rattle her. She smirked at him, as if he had brought a paper sword to a gunfight. When Dr. Alvarez read her findings into the record, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Martin didn't grandstand. He let the facts collect in quiet stacks until they were taller than the lies. Then he asked if I wished to say anything. I stood, hands clasped, the room fuzzing at the edges and sharpening again. I taught for 40 years, I said. Before that, I learned to survive a life that was not gentle. I balance my checkbook every Sunday, and I can still quote more lines than is polite at parties. I'm not confused. I am grieving. Those are not the same. I paused. My daughter believes control is care. I believe care is choice. I won't sign my house away to prove I love her. I sat. The judge nodded once, inscrutable. We recessed at noon. In the hallway, a hum of cases and coffee. Nora had texted me a photo of our pears. They look less like potatoes this week. I smiled, the lavender waking in my purse. Martin leaned against the wall beside me. Whatever he throws next, he said, meaning Price, we're ready. I looked through the glass at Sophia across the lobby. For a heartbeat, her eyes lifted to mine. No softness, but not a blade either. Something unreadable. Then she turned back to Mark. If I lose, I said to Martin, surprised by my own even tone, I lose my freedom. And if you win, he asked. I watched my daughter's back, the set of her shoulders. If I win, I said, I may lose my child. He didn't offer the reflexive comfort that polite people give. He only nodded, as if recognizing the size of the truth. I closed my eyes and breathed in lavender. When I opened them, the hall was the same. Lawyers, footsteps, a judge passing with a rustle of robe, my neighbor adjusting her cardigan, my life balanced on a threshold. And I knew, with a clarity that didn't need thunder to announce itself, if I lose my freedom. If I win, I lose my child. But at least, I still have myself. It happened late one evening, almost by accident. I wasn't looking for proof. I had long since stopped snooping into Sophia's life, but when she left her laptop open during a visit years ago, she had saved my email account on the shared cloud. I had forgotten about it until, one restless night, I scrolled through the family folder I still had access to. Mostly, it was grocery lists, business memos, and casual notes between her and Mark. Then I saw the subject line, draft agreement, M. Lewis signature attached. My pulse quickened. I clicked. There it was. A PDF glowing on the screen like an accusation. My name, my address, my home all listed in neat legal print. And at the bottom, in crisp black letters, my signature. Except, it wasn't mine. I leaned closer, squinting at the flourish of the L in Lewis. It was smooth, too smooth, the kind of perfection only a machine can replicate. My real hand shook, trembled, hesitated. This one was clean, unbroken, artificial. A scan. A copy. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt, the walls pressed inward. My hands trembled against the keyboard, but my eyes burned clear, sharp, unblinking. They want to erase me, I whispered, with a file. A file no heavier than a feather. The betrayal wasn't just the forgery, it was the banality of it. Decades of sacrifice, of love, of teaching, of saving every penny reduced to a PDF attachment in an email chain. So easy, so casual, so cruel. I printed the file, the hum of the machine loud in the quiet house. Each page slid out, still warm, smelling faintly of toner. I stared at the false version of myself inked across the paper, a stranger's hand pretending to be mine. I carried the pages into the reading room, placed them on the desk beside the wedding photo frame. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, a memory of love, of vows, of family. On the other, a contract written to erase me. My hands shook, but my vision sharpened. A heat rose in me that was not grief this time, but fury. For weeks, I had let them drag me through rumor and accusation, but this was the line I would not allow them to cross. I picked up the phone and dialed Martin's office. He was out for the evening, so I left a message with his assistant. Then, I called Anik, the associate lawyer he had introduced to me earlier that week. She answered on the second ring, voice brisk and alert. "Mrs. Lewis, are you all right?" "No," I said, my throat raw. "But I found something. And it changes everything." I explained, words tumbling out, my voice cracking but clear. She told me to scan and email her the file, to keep the printouts safe, to document how I had discovered it. "Don't confront them directly," she warned. "Let us handle it." But part of me wanted to drive across town, slam the forged contract onto their marble countertop, and scream, "How dare you? How dare you pretend to be me?" Instead, I folded the pages into a manila folder and tucked it under my arm like armor. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fake signature staring back at me, my name stolen and twisted into a weapon. The next morning, I met Anna at her office. She wore a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back into a knot that meant business. I slid the folder across the desk. She opened it, studied the pages, and nodded once, sharply. "This is big. If authenticated, it's not just unethical, it's fraud. Possibly criminal." My stomach lurched. Criminal. The word sounded too heavy for Sophia, for the daughter I had once cradled. But the evidence lay between us, undeniable. Anna looked at me, her eyes steady. "Do you understand what this means, Mrs. Lewis? This isn't just about keeping your house. This is about exposing them." I pressed my palms flat on the desk to keep them from trembling. "I understand." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then I added, almost to myself, "I am no longer the victim of forged pages. I am the one who will tear their mask away." Anna leaned forward, her voice firm. "Good. Hold on to that. We'll build our case around it." I left her office with the manila folder clutched against my chest, the lavender bouquet tucked in my bag, and a strange new fire in my heart. Fear still walked beside me, but it no longer led the way. The days before the hearing stretched long and heavy, like an old corridor lined with locked doors. Every step forward rattled with nerves. Still, I knew this. If I didn't prepare, they would paint me as a ghost in my own story. So I began with the mirror. At first, I could hardly look myself in the eye. I stood in the bedroom, gripping the dresser edge for balance, my reflection pale under the yellow lamp. My voice cracked when I tried to speak the words Martin had written down for me. My name, my age, my years as a teacher, my record of independence. "State your occupation." I was a literature teacher for 40 years. The words came out thin, my breath shallow. My throat felt like sandpaper. I shook my head, pressed my palms flat against the dresser, and tried again. This time, I squared my shoulders. I taught literature for 40 years, thousands of students, hundreds of essays, more chalk dust than I can count. Stronger, still trembling, but stronger. Each evening, I repeated the drill. "Do you pay your bills?" "Yes, on time, every month." "See the ledger." "Do you remember dates?" "Yes, every Tuesday at the library, every Thursday at painting class." Sometimes, my voice wavered. Sometimes, I faltered and forgot my script. But gradually, the reflection in the mirror began to resemble, not a frightened old woman, but a teacher again, one who could command a classroom. Meanwhile, I gathered evidence. The dining table became an archive. Piles of old pay stubs, thin, faded slips from the school district proved my decades of steady work. A stack of handwritten letters, from former students, ink smudged, some on lined paper, others on embossed stationery, telling me how I had changed their lives. I reread one from a girl named Hannah. "Mrs. Lewis, you were the first person who believed I could write. You told me my voice mattered. That saved me." I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "Hannah, lend me your courage now." Beside the letters lay my 6 journals entries, each dated, each recording the small rhythms of life. The weather, the meals I cooked, the books I read, the birthdays I remembered. Proof not just of memory, but of attention, of presence. Mrs. Parker helped me organize everything into neat folders. She labeled them in her crisp handwriting: employment, education, finances, personal journals. Look at this, she said, holding up a pile. "Most people can't keep track of their socks, Margaret. You've kept track of your soul." I smiled, the first genuine smile in days. One afternoon, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, I saw Mr. Hughes, my old colleague from the English department, holding a briefcase and a thermos of coffee. "Thought you could use a hand," he said. We sat at the dining table, sorting documents. He peered at one of my journals, shaking his head. "You've always been meticulous," he said. "Remember when you caught me misquoting Frost in front of a class?" I laughed, a sound that felt almost foreign. "I wasn't going to let you ruin the road not taken." His face softened. "Margaret, you taught us courage every day. Now it's your turn. Teach it to yourself." The words settled into me like a seed in fertile soil. As the days passed, I rehearsed with Martin and Anna. They sat across from me at the conference table, asking sharp, pointed questions the way opposing counsel would. "Isn't it true you forgot to pay your electric bill last December?" I swallowed, then replied steadily, "No. The bill was auto-drafted on December 14, as it has been for the last 5 years. I have the bank statement here." Martin nodded. "Good. Short, firm, factual." Anna leaned forward. "They'll try to rattle you. Let silence be your friend. Pause before you answer. Make them wait on your words." At home, I practiced that too. Standing before the mirror, I forced myself to pause 3 beats before answering each imaginary question. At first, it felt awkward, but slowly, the silence became power. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I spread the evidence across the table one last time, like laying out armor before battle. The lavender bouquet, now dry and fragile, still scented the air faintly. I tucked a sprig into my journal for strength. I caught my reflection in the window. An older woman with lines around her eyes, hair silvered by years. But there was something else in that face now. Resolve. I picked up the wedding photo frame from the mantel, held it close, and whispered to the smiling bride inside, "Tomorrow I stand. Not for you, not even for her, but for me." When dawn came, I dressed carefully: navy skirt, cream blouse, modest pearls at my ears, clothes that said teacher, clothes that said steady. I slid the manila folders into my bag, feeling their weight like a shield. Before leaving, I returned to the mirror one last time. My hands still trembled, but my eyes were clear. "This is it," I told myself. Not practice, not rehearsal. The real stage. I lifted my chin, spoke the words I had written in my journal the night before. I am no longer rehearsing the role of someone else's victim. I am writing the final chapter in my own voice. And for the first time, I believed it. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and nerves. Marble floors stretched like frozen rivers, every step echoing too loudly. I clutched my tote bag, heavy with journals, pay stubs, and letters. The lavender sprig tucked in my pocket gave off a tired but stubborn scent. Around me, strangers murmured about their own cases, their whispers bouncing beneath the high ceiling. When the clerk called my name, Lewis v. Lewis. My stomach nodded. I rose, straightened my skirt, and followed Martin and Anna into the courtroom. It was crowded. Too crowded. Rows of benches filled with curious onlookers, the gallery buzzing with a hunger for spectacle. The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the buzz dropped into silence. The bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. I stood, knees trembling but back straight. The lights above were mercilessly bright, leaching the color from faces, painting everything in cold illumination. I felt like a specimen under glass. Across the aisle, Sophia sat beside Mark, their lawyer David Price between them. My daughter wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared ahead, lips tight, a stranger in my child's body. Price opened with practiced sorrow, his tone dripping with concern. Your Honor, this is not a case of greed. This is a case of compassion. My clients are simply trying to protect Mrs. W. Lewis from herself. She is no longer capable of managing her affairs. She is forgetful, confused, unstable. He turned to me, voice lowering. She is, tragically, senile. The words cracked through the room. Senile. As if I were a rotting book in the library of life. I clenched my hands in my lap, feeling the sharp sting of my nails against my palms. My breath came shallow, but I forced myself still. He brought witnesses one by one. Mr. Hargreaves, squinting at the microphone, claimed he'd seen me wander into the street one morning. I wanted to shout that I'd been chasing the recycling truck, waving a cardboard box, but Martin squeezed my hand under the table. The wellness advocate described second-hand reports of me forgetting to lock my door. Then came a former acquaintance, persuaded somehow, who said she worried about my mental state. No specifics, just worry, stretched thin until it looked like evidence. Every testimony stacked like bricks, each one false, each one designed to wall me in. When they rested their case, the air felt heavy, as though the lie had weight of its own. Now, it was Anna's turn. She rose gracefully, eyes steady. Your Honor, she began. The picture painted here is not of my client, Margaret Lewis. It is of a phantom, a fiction stitched together from gossip and convenience. Allow us to show you the truth. She called Mr. Patel, the pharmacist, who produced meticulous records, every prescription picked up on time. Then Judith from my reading group, who made the gallery chuckle when she quipped, "The only one who gets lost in discussion is Leonard, and he's half my age." Even the judge's lips twitched. Nora from painting class testified with warmth, describing me as the terror of crooked horizons. She held up the attendance sheets, every line signed in my hand. Finally, Mrs. Parker marched to the stand, cardigan crisp, gaze unflinching. Mrs. Lewis is as sharp as I am, she declared, and I balance my own checkbook, thank you very much. She helps me more than I help her. If she's senile, then the rest of us may as well pack it in. The courtroom rippled with soft laughter. Price tried to rattle her, but she skewered him with a glare. Young man, she said, I've outlived 3 husbands and 2 bad hips. Don't think I can't outtalk you. The gallery chuckled again, and I felt a flicker of pride. Then Anna turned to me. Mrs. Lewis, would you like to speak? My throat went dry. I stood slowly, every eye in the room dragging across me like weights. I steadied myself on the rail of the witness stand, the lavender sprig in my pocket, a small pulse of courage. Mrs. Lewis, the judge said, you may proceed. I drew in a deep breath, and then, clear and strong, I spoke. I taught literature for 40 years. In 1985, I stood in a classroom full of restless teenagers and read these lines from Emily Dickinson, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd banish us, you know. I see now, Your Honor, that those words prepared me for this moment. I am not nobody. I am not erased. I am not unstable. I have lived a life of work, of record, of care. I raised my daughter with everything I had, And today she stands here, asking this court to declare me gone while I am very much alive. The courtroom was silent, so silent that I could hear the shuffle of the bailiff's shoes. I lifted the folder from the table and placed it on the stand. Here are my journals. Here are my bills, my pay stubs, my records, my letters from students. 40 years of proof that I can carry my life. If I am guilty of anything, it is of loving too much, of giving too much. But that does not make me incompetent. It makes me a mother. When I sat down, my knees nearly gave way, but the hush in the room held me upright. Anna's final move was a blade. She introduced the forged contract, the email Mark had sent with my scanned signature. She projected it onto the screen for the judge, the false signature looming like graffiti across my name. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the judge's brow furrowed. Forgery, Anna said, her voice like steel. A deliberate attempt to erase Mrs. Peachy, Lewis's agency, to strip her of the very home she built. This is not compassion. This is theft, dressed in concern. Price stammered, objected, flailed. The judge silenced him with a single raised hand. The air crackled. For the first time, Sophia looked at me. Her face was pale, lips trembling. I searched her eyes for remorse, for recognition, but found only fear. At last, the judge spoke. His words were simple, but they landed like thunder. This court finds no evidence of incapacity. The petition is denied. Full ownership and control of property remain with Mrs. Strawn. Margaret Lewis. Furthermore, this court recognizes the submission of fraudulent documents and refers the matter to the district attorney for review. My breath caught. Around me, the room seemed to exhale all at once. Anna's hand squeezed mine. Martin nodded, calm but triumphant. Sophia buried her face in her hands. Mark whispered something furious in her ear. Price packed his briefcase with jerky, angry motions. I rose, legs unsteady, but spirit unbroken. The gallery blurred with faces, but the weight pressing on me for months lifted like a shroud torn away. I turned toward the judge, toward the court, toward the truth itself, and spoke the only words that mattered now. I am not their erased memory. I am the keeper of my truth. The gavel struck, sharp as a heartbeat, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a theater after the final act. Strangers filed out, whispering about the verdict, their voices trailing down the marble halls. I walked in silence between Martin and Anna, the lavender sprig still in my pocket, its scent now faint, nearly gone. Outside, the air was cool and startlingly clear. Reporters pressed forward, cameras flashing, questions flying. Martin shielded me with a raised hand. Anna guided me past the chaos, her touch steady on my elbow. We didn't speak until I was safe inside a cab. Only when the city lights slid by the window did the reality sink in. I had won. The house was mine. My name, my life, intact. And yet, I felt no triumph. Only exhaustion, like a soldier returning from battle to find the land scorched. At home, I pushed open the door to the quiet that had always been waiting for me. The house greeted me with its familiar creaks, its long shadows, the faint smell of paper and dust. On the mantel, the sex wedding photo frame still leaned where I had left it. I lifted it gently, wiping away a smudge of glass. Her smile. Sophia's smile was frozen in time, bright and unguarded, untouched by anger or betrayal. My chest ached. This time, I didn't set it back on the mantel. I carried it to my bedroom and opened the wardrobe, pulling out the bottom drawer. Inside lay a collection of keepsakes. Sophia's childhood drawings, letters from former students, a faded scarf that had once smelled of perfume. I placed the frame among them, like laying down an heirloom at the end of a chapter. The drawer slid shut with a soft thud, final but gentle. Night settled heavy around the house. I made tea but barely touched it. The ticking of the clock grew louder, each second dragging against my nerves. At last, I gave up pretending at normalcy and sat on the edge of my bed. The silence pressed in. For the first time, I allowed myself to whisper into it. Sophia, I still love you. I will always love you. But I cannot let love turn into chains. The words dissolved into the dark. No answer came back. I remembered her first recital, when her bow squeaked against the violin, and she ran to me afterward, cheeks hot with shame. I had cupped her face and said, "It was beautiful because it was yours." That memory rose up now like a wave, sharp and merciless. I pressed my face into my hands. Tears came, hot and relentless, washing away the courtroom's brightness. Victory had been written on the judge's decree, but loss was scrawled deep inside me. Sometime past midnight, I walked the hallways of the house. My fingers brushed along the wallpaper, every groove familiar. I paused at the kitchen, remembering the years of hurried breakfasts, the clatter of schoolbooks, the laughter that once filled these walls. Now the rooms echoed with emptiness. In the living room, the armchair still held the indentation of my body from nights of rehearsing testimony. I touched it, feeling the fabric's worn texture. This house had stood with me through the trial, silent and steady. I whispered again, not to Sophia this time, but to myself. You are here. You are still here. The words felt like a promise I needed to keep. At dawn, the first light crept through the curtains. I brewed fresh tea, poured it into the china cup I had once reserved for guests. This morning, it was for me. Steam rose in delicate spirals, warming my hands. The world outside was unchanged. Birds hopping along the fence, the mailman's steady walk. But I had been altered. I had faced my daughter in a courtroom and refused to disappear. I knew the phone would not ring. No apology. No sudden reconciliation. Perhaps Sophia would never speak to me again. That truth pierced me, but I met it head on, because the alternative, surrendering my name, my will, my dignity, would have been worse. I sipped the tea slowly, letting the heat anchor me in the present. Later that morning, Mrs. Parker knocked on my door. She held a basket of muffins, her eyes soft. "You did it," she said simply. I nodded, my throat too thick for words. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Winning doesn't erase the hurt, but it keeps you whole. And that matters." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her blunt kindness. After she left, I stood by the window, watching the river of life move on outside. Cars, children with backpacks, couples walking dogs. The world was indifferent. And yet, that indifference was strangely comforting. It reminded me the storm had passed, but I was still standing. That night, I opened my journal. The page was blank, waiting. My hand hovered with the pen. At last I wrote, "Today I learned that a verdict can give back your rights, but it cannot give back your family. And yet, perhaps it can give something else. The strength to remain myself." I laid the pen down, closed the book, and let the silence settle around me like a shawl. Lying in bed, I whispered once more into the dark, my voice steady this time. "Sophia, wherever you are, know this. I love you still. But my love cannot be your leash." And then, with tears drying on my cheeks, I allowed sleep to come. Because I understood at last, winning in court did not erase the pain, but it saved my soul. The "for sale" sign went up in front of the old house on a bright morning. I stood at the window and watched as the realtor hammered it into the ground, each thud echoing like a heartbeat. The house groaned quietly, as though it knew its time with me was ending. It wasn't an easy decision. Every hallway held a memory. Every creak of the floor carried a piece of my life. But after the trial, after Sophia's absence became the louder silence than any gavel, I knew I needed a different kind of home, one that wasn't a battleground. I packed slowly. Journals went into boxes, tied carefully with string. Old lesson plans and annotated books filled another. I left behind cracked dishes, threadbare curtains, and the endless weight of a house that had been too big for one woman for too long. When the moving truck pulled away, I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead I stood in the empty living room, sunlight cutting across the bare floor, and whispered, "Thank you. You kept me safe. Now let me go." My new apartment was smaller, 2 rooms and a kitchenette on the third floor of a brick building near the library. The walls were freshly painted, the windows wide, the air different, lighter, unburdened. On the first night, I made tea and sat by the window. Below, I could see the library steps where children clattered down with storybooks and students hunched over laptops late into the evening. The city's pulse felt close enough to touch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for a call, for a knock, for another demand. The silence here was my own. I joined the library's reading club the following week. They met every Tuesday at 6, a circle of gray heads and quick smiles, with dog-eared novels tucked under their arms. "Welcome, Margaret," the moderator, Ruth, said warmly. We read Toni Morrison that month. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled at first, but soon I felt the old rhythm of teaching return. I caught myself gesturing with my hands, leaning forward with the thrill of words. The others nodded, asked questions, laughed with me. Afterward, a woman named Linda pressed my arm. "You should talk more," she said. "You bring the pages alive." Her words lingered like a gift. I also signed up for a senior yoga class, though my joints protested with every stretch. There I met Harold, a widower with a gentle smile and a fondness for terrible puns. "Downward dog?" he said one morning, grunting as he bent. "Feels more like downward disaster." We laughed until the instructor hushed us. Friendship grew in unexpected places. A retired nurse, a painter, a former postman. They became my circle. We traded recipes, swapped stories, and filled the quiet with easy company. I realized then how starved I had been for laughter that wasn't edged with tension, for companionship that asked nothing but presence. One Saturday, Mrs. Parker visited. She brought another bouquet of lavender, fresher this time, its scent filling the small apartment. "You're glowing," she said, settling into my new armchair. "I think it's the light," I replied. "No," she said firmly, "it's you. You finally laid down the weight." She was right. My shoulders felt freer, my steps lighter. The apartment might have been small, but it fit me the way a well-worn coat fits on a cold day. Snug, familiar, enough. Months passed. Seasons turned. One morning, I brewed tea and carried it to the window. The sunlight poured in, golden and forgiving, landing on my face like a benediction. I lifted the cup with steady hands. The tea was hot, fragrant. I breathed it in slowly. It struck me then how different this moment was from the ones that had defined my past. No phone vibrating with demands, no forged papers waiting to strip me bare, no courtroom lights glaring down. Just me, tea, sunlight, and a future uncluttered by fear. I whispered to myself, almost laughing at the simplicity, "This is freedom." Sophia never called. Not once. At first, I waited. Each ring of the phone twisted my chest with hope. Each silence deepened the wound. But as the weeks stretched into months, hope softened into something else. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but a quiet acknowledgement. She had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. I still loved her. That would never change. But love no longer meant erasing myself to prove it. One night, I wrote in my journal, "A mother's love can survive distance. What it cannot survive is chains." I closed the book without tears. My days became simple rituals. Mornings with tea, afternoons at the library, evenings filled with pages and paint. I laughed with new friends, argued about novels, learned to stretch into yoga poses without falling over. Life didn't roar back all at once. It unfolded quietly, like dawn slipping into a room. And with each day, I felt less like the woman who had been erased, and more like the woman who had chosen to write again. One morning, I found myself staring at a blank page in my journal. Instead of filling it with fear or grief, I wrote a single line in large, steady letters. I am no longer a page crossed out. I am the author of a new chapter. As I set down the pen, sunlight streamed through the window, warming the words, sealing them like a promise. And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed them. I want to end this journey, not in the courtroom, not in the echo of slammed doors, but here, face to face with you. If you have read this far, then you have carried my story in your hands. You've walked with me through the rain, into the silence of my empty house, into the blinding lights of the courtroom, and out into the small apartment where I now live. For that, I thank you. So let me say it plainly. Thank you for walking this road with me. Margaret Lewis, once erased by her own daughter, now the keeper of her own key. I don't share this story to seek pity. I share it because I know there are others out there, mothers, fathers, grandparents, even children, who have been told by their own flesh and blood, "You don't matter anymore." I know how sharp those words can cut, how easily they can hollow out your sense of self. When Sophia told me, "You're dead to me," I believed, for a moment, that I was. But the trial, the evidence, the courage of my friends, it all forced me to face the truth. I was still here. My voice was still mine. My life was still mine. Now I ask you this. If one day your own child erased you with a single sentence, would you stay silent or stand for your truth? I cannot answer for you. Each of us carries our own battles, our own limits, our own breaking points. But I can tell you what it felt like to choose. Terrifying, lonely, and, in the end, liberating. If my story touched you, let it not end on this page. Leave a comment, share this with someone who needs it, or follow along. Somewhere out there, another parent is fighting back tears tonight, wondering if they have the strength to keep standing. Maybe your voice, your words, can give them courage. Stories travel further than we imagine. They find the ears of those who need them most. Mine reached you. Yours may reach the next soul who feels invisible. So I leave you with this. I am not their forgotten past. I am my freedom. And perhaps, if you need it, you can say the same.